So as we await the release of the annual crime statistics, let's turn our attention to the safety at our tertiary institutions. South Africa's universities are still reeling from the rape and murder of UCT student Uyinene Mrwetyana. Her murder outraged South Africans, giving the very high levels of gender-based violence targeting women on a daily basis. 26 university vice-chancellors, they plan to engage on this matter with the presidency, we understand, registering their anger and imploring government to develop a plan of action to address violence on campuses. Let's get more on this story now, and we're joined via Skype by Professor Ahmed Bawa, Chief Executive Officer of Universities South Africa. Professor, thank you very much indeed for coming through. Let's just get a sense of what you hope to achieve here with regards to the interaction with the presidency.
First of all, thank you so much for having us on the program. I think that it would be a kind of a too mild a statement to say that we're facing a serious crisis on our campuses. And on the one hand, there's gender-based violence, which is really simply unacceptable and has to be dealt with. And on the other hand, we're also seeing increasing levels of violence between students and people outside the campuses and so on. So we are generally very, very concerned about the security of our students. We indeed plan to have a meeting with the presidency, but our first step is really to have a meeting with our own minister, the Minister of Higher Education and Training. Higher Education, Science and Technology is his new designation. And that meeting is tomorrow. And the idea is really for us tomorrow to have a joint approach with the minister for that meeting with the presidency. What we hope to achieve, what we hope to achieve is the following, and that is that there's no possibility of the universities themselves resolving this big issue, that this has to be dealt with in the broader societal framework, if you like. Universities can have policies in place and procedures to deal with the issues, can try to make the campuses safer and so on. But it is a deeply societal issue. And it reaches all the way back, to primary schooling and parenting and so on.
So Professor, look, apart from political leadership and leadership at university level, you also need, I guess, a practical agenda and progressive policies to ensure that perpetrators are dealt with decisively.
We want to work on this at three levels. The one is sort of immediate actions, just what can be taken in terms of perpetrators, ensuring that perpetrators aren't moving from campus to campus, and those kinds of things. And lined up as well, which will be discussed tomorrow with our minister, is a meeting with the minister, with Minister Becky Cele. So that's online as well. So that's the one thing, just immediate issues. The second is really to call on the presidency to take the lead in developing a national approach to this. In other words, saying it has to be a cabinet-wide approach. This, higher education can't solve this problem. Neither can the police. And it has to involve the Department of Health, the Department of Basic Education, and so on. So the idea is really for political leadership at the presidency level to produce a coherent approach to this issue.
So what are we dealing with here, Professor? Sorry to interject. What are we dealing with here in our tertiary institutions? To get a sense of the problem in our tertiary institutions, have you managed to collate the numbers of sexual violence cases so that we know what we're dealing with here and how deep the rot is?
Look, we don't actually have the numbers. What we have done is a very big study which kind of relates to the preparedness of universities to address these big issues. That document is currently before Cabinet. It's being discussed by Cabinet. What I can say is that the levels of crime, suicide, attempted suicides, violence between students, violence between students and external people are really in epidemic proportions, and we have to have a national approach to this.
What about the measures that have already been put in place to strengthen, I guess, a counter-culture of rape and gender-based violence in our institutions? What has been put in place already?
Well, first of all the universities now have kind of policies and procedures in place to deal rapidly with issues related to violence. Now, there are some backlogs, I have to say, at certain institutions, but we are focusing on those now to try and get them to act swiftly. Yeah. But it's also an issue of saying that we have to work in concert with the criminal justice system. It's one thing for universities to say we're going to expel a student because he or she has been involved in gender violence. It's something quite different to have that student subjected to the rigors of the criminal justice system. So we have to work in concert, it seems to me, and that's where this big meeting comes into play.
Look, Prof.
Just one.
Yeah, sure. Carry on.
Yeah. Just one other point. The third thing that we wanted to discuss with the president is, in fact, the role of the universities in the broader social kind of project, if you like. I mean, universities are social institutions. They're created by societies, and they are a big resource. So what we would really like to see is a concerted effort to bring the universities into that national project. And they are institutions with agency, and we need to bring the research and the capacity building and the production of a new generation of anti-gender-based violence activists and so on. Yeah. Bring all of that to play in the national project.
Look, the level of anger, you would agree, is palpable, and already we've seen a number of individuals that have been named on social media as alleged perpetrators of gender-based violence. What do you make of this kind of strategy to name and shame?
Yeah, look, we're concerned about that, of course, because one of the things that that concerns us is that putting out people's names like that in that form is completely untested. There's no kind of rigor, if you like, to now. But that stems, it stems from frustration that action isn't being taken rapidly enough. So 2 points to make. The one is just the idea that we really have to ensure that each of those concerns that are raised in whatever form are taken seriously and are investigated. And secondly, that systems are put in place which can act swiftly, that they do not depend on kind of on the march of time, if you like, for actions to be taken.
Yeah. Look, when you speak to so many women that have come out and voiced their concerns, there seems to be a need for a deep culture change where the victim is not blamed and the perpetrator, they're not shielded.
Yes, I think that's absolutely correct, and that's why I said that every single case, whether it's on social media or whatever form, whether it's on a whistleblowing site or whatever, has to be taken seriously and has to be considered. And so that's the one thing. But the second thing is, in fact, the need for very, very deep culture change. Yeah. And that doesn't happen it isn't going to happen simply at the university. This really harks back to primary schooling and in fact, even to parenting and so on. So the question is, how do we generate this new culture, if you like? Yeah. A culture that's anti-violence and in particular anti-gender-based violence.
Look, just to talk to your point, Professor, in terms of sexual harassment and that phrase that you keep on hearing, whether it's primary school, secondary schooling or tertiary institutions, you hear this phrase, boys will be boys. That needs to stop, isn't it? Because I remember a friend once summed it up quite succinctly in an opinion piece, saying that by reducing sexual harassment to a natural male behavior, we make the woman the villain instead of the victim.
Yeah. That it's just simply no excuse. I mean, and we should really, and that's part of the culture, which we have to deal with. But just going back to that, because I think there's also a need to try and understand how we can get men to stand up, men and boys, to stand up and to be counted. That this isn't simply a campaign for women activists. That this is really it's a much broader. There's a need for a much broader campaign in which men have to stand up and be counted. Silence is not enough either. Irrespective of how innocent you are, it's not enough to be silent. That there's a need to stand up and be counted. And the other side of it, of course, is to really get a much better understanding of what is producing this culture.
Professor, as always, thank you very much indeed for coming through. You're more than welcome to come back onto the program and give us an update with regards to this meeting that you are having with the Minister tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Ahmed Bawa, Chief Executive Officer of Universities South Africa, talking to us here on the agenda this morning.